This is what I'm working on today. It's gonna be a really cute box pleat valance. Only 32 inches is the finished width. 14 inches is the finished length, 3.5 is the return, and it is a toile fabric with a mama, the kiddos, and a dog. And the designer wants that section of the fabric centered in the middle, and then a tree over here and a tree over here with contrast fabric in each of the 4 box pleat sections. And she's even labeled the sizes of each section. So the center section is bigger than the ends. So we have 16, 8, and 8. And here is the center section with the mom, the kids, and the dog. And I was able to get a really nice balance on this piece where after the hem goes in the bottom, this will be the hem, the bottom of the valance will land right at the edge of this little island, and the top will be somewhere up here so that the pattern is just a nice balance, so that the 14-inch finished length will show off everything needed and not be weird and cut off the heads too close to the top or cut off too much of the pretty island at the bottom. So then the rest of the cuts had to be carefully planned. And here we have the left return, the far left box pleat, the left section of the valance. This is the 8-inch section, so there's a tree. And it had a little cutout right here, which will get mounted to the board just about right there. So I lucked out where that's not going to affect my cut, but I did need this piece, so that worked out nicely. Here's a box pleat. Here's the center, another box pleat. This is my right tree. So I had to do 2 different trees just because that's all the fabric I had. I couldn't get 2 of the same trees on here because we have 2 of these valances, and that would have meant I would have needed 4 of the same tree, and I could only get 2 and 2. But I like this better anyway because it's a little more variety. And this is the tree that is kind of to the right of this main scene here in the middle. So that's the right hand side, and then this is the left hand tree, which this kind of is already, if you see this whole piece of fabric in one width, you would see this tree right over here, and you would see this tree right over here. You can kind of see those leaves. So it's going to be a natural flow to have the palm tree on this side, and we'll call this an oak tree over here. So anyway, it's going to flow really nicely, and then another box pleat, contrast solid, and then this is the right return. So a lot of careful planning here, and now it's time to sew them all together and then put the lining on the bottom, turn the hem, and then box pleat all the pleats, and then mounting. So I'll try to take you through all of that, all of those steps. It's gonna be real cute. So I started sewing the sections together. Here is the far left return, and then the first box pleat contrast solid piece, and then this is the left side of the face of the valance. So there's the palm tree on the left side. Now it's time for the next section of solid box pleat, and this one I cut bigger than this box pleat because this one's going to be on the corner, so I couldn't go as big. And this one, since I could go bigger, I did. So anyway, I'm starting each piece sewing at the bottom so that all of my bottoms line up rather than starting at the top. So I'm going to flip this around so that these corners are nice and even. And I'm doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance on everything. So it's really important to get those bottoms really even, and then start sewing back stitch. And then as I'm going, I'm doing the taut sewing method. So I'm And I'm actually pulling on the bottom layer a tiny bit and leaving that top layer just land naturally, and then holding both ends of the fabric with either hand and then pulling a little bit of tension in between, and that's the taut sewing method that will keep the fabric from puckering. And each cut is 20 inches long, so by the time I get to the end, my tops should be even, but if they're not perfectly even, that's okay, because that'll get cut off at the mounting stage. And that's why I start at the bottom, to make sure that the bottom is super even. So I'm still pretty even, which is good. But like I said, if it was off a little bit there, that would be okay. But by ending up even, that means that neither side puckered at all. So that's a nice finish and a nice stitch. So now I have to just keep track of where I'm at and keep my pieces in order. So after this solid box pleat section, now I'm ready for the middle panel of the valance, which is the main scene with the people and the dog. So this one goes upside down. This is the bottom. So right sides together, and find the bottom corner, flip it over. And I prefer not to pin all these pieces because it's just more difficult to handle. So I just add them on one at a time in order. And then once you have the stitch started, you can grab either end and put that little bit of tension on there. And then as you go, keep adjusting. And this one here is ending up a little bit off at the top, like I was telling you about, happens sometimes. So you see the top is a little bit longer. That could just be a little bit of an error in cutting, so maybe the fabric wasn't laying completely square on the table when I cut it, which happens. So you can see the top here is a little bit off, but that's no big deal. That'll all get cut off after I mount this on the board. But the important part is that my bottom is super even, because that's where I'm going to add the lining and then turn the hem, and we definitely want to have a straight hem. So far there's all my bottoms, and they are all nice and even, each one. And so now I'm halfway, because that's the middle panel. Now I need another solid, and make sure you put right sides together and then find that bottom corner and then flip it around, and just keep continuing this until they're all put together. And there's two of these, so this is the first one, and then I'll do the same to the other. Then I'll bring both valances to the serger and serge all of these seams, and then I can press them. I remember now why this piece is longer than this piece, because I ended up cutting the bottom of this middle section shorter on the bottom, about 1/2 inch, because I wanted the top of this section to land at 1/2 inch lower to see more of the blue sky. So that's why these two ends are longer, here and here. And I had already forgotten when I'm sitting here sewing, and I just cut them this morning. So anyway, just thought I'd give you the answer to that little mystery there. Okay, so now we have all of the seams stitched and serged for this valance, and I'm going to press all the seams. This is a R for right, so I made sure to put the right return on the right side. Anyway, so I'm gonna press the seams to one side since it's serged, and I want them all to go underneath the print fabric. So this seam is going to go this way rather than this way, and then this seam is going to aim the other direction. And then the next one will be this way. So each time I get to a seam, I want it to be aiming towards the print fabric, just because this is thicker, the solid part, and it's gonna lay better in this direction. And then when I go to make the box pleats, it's going to come with easier and lay nicer. That's what it's going to look like. So see, that one goes that way and this one goes this way, and you see this one's not pressed yet and it's kind of sticking up. So once they're all pressed and laying nicely, it'll make a really pretty valance. But I can't do that part until I have the lining in place. But I want to press these before I sew the lining on the bottom, because that way all the seams will be pressed in the correct direction, and it'll be easier to make sure that they stay aiming in the right direction if I press them first. So don't forget to press as you go. Don't wait until you have the lining in, because then it's too late. You could still do it, but if you have one going the wrong direction, then you have to open the stitch right there. So see here, if I turn this over now, this seam is aiming towards the print and this seam is aiming towards the print. So even though they're going opposite directions, that's okay in this case, because they're going towards the same fabric, the print. Typically when you're making maybe a drape, you would press all of your seams to one direction. You wouldn't go back and forth like this. But this is a special case because I'm box pleating these seams to the middle of the solid, and by pressing the seams away from the solid, each seam will lay the same. So I'll have consistency. Something got a chunk out of that piece, but that's not going to show. That's going to be up on the board. Looks like the Cookie Monster was here. One more. There's my L for left return. Now that it's all together, I can take those off. Okay, so now I can add my lining to the bottom. And then once I turn the hem, it's going to have a 2-inch bottom hem. Then I can put the box pleats in. So it's going to go like that. But that's a few steps down the road, and I have one more to press right here. So I'll get this one pressed and then I'll cut the lining. I'm just adding the lining to the bottom of the valance with a 1/2-inch seam allowance. Make sure the seams stay directed in the direction that you pressed them, towards the print. Try to keep the lining from pushing by taut sewing, keeping the layers taut between both of your hands, and then all of these extra threads will get cut off in the serger. You can pin this if that makes it easier. I just find it saves time joining them at the machine rather than pinning. Sometimes I do if I feel like it's going to be a challenging fabric to work on. And then keep those seams going in the right direction. It's just another reminder, because once you make your box pleats, if they're going in the wrong direction, it's not going to lay nicely, and you might want to go back to the machine and fix that, which would be difficult. More annoying than difficult. So I cut the pieces of this valance long enough to have a 2-inch hem at the bottom, plus a 1/2 inch for the seam allowance that I'm doing right now, and then another 2 inches for mounting at the top. This lining is a long cut that has been railroaded, so there's no seams in the lining. I'm making some draperies along with this valance, and I needed a long cut of lining for some of the drapes, but I'm not using the whole cut, so I was able to use part of one of the lining cuts, for the valances, and that way I could railroad them, the lining, so that there's no seams in the lining. So that's nice. Whenever you can railroad your lining, that just makes a nice finish and there's less seams to worry about. Because then you would want to hide your seams of your lining inside the pleats, just like you do the base fabric. So that's just more seams to worry about. Okay, so now that I have the two pieces put together, I'm checking that all of the seams are going in the right direction. Then I'll take it to the serger and serge off the fuzzies for a nice finish. You wouldn't want to leave this raw because since this is not blackout, all of these threads would show through when the light comes through. And even if I was using blackout lining, I would still serge the bottom because these threads would drive me crazy. Okay, so now we are at the serger and I can just run this through the serger really quickly. Doesn't have to be quickly, but it's going to be because it's already sewn together. So it doesn't take much time at all. So much better. So now we have number 2 laying here. You can see how it looks when it's flat. So all the pieces are just stitched together, but they're not box pleated yet. And then also the lining is stitched on the bottom with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then a nice serged edge. So no loose threads are going to show through. So the next step is to press this hem right here, and then we'll turn the 2-inch hem so that the back looks like this with a nice 2-inch hem, and then pleat all the box pleats, and then turn the side hems, and then pin it all together and get it ready for mounting. So once this one looks like this one, then I will mount them on the boards. But it looks pretty interesting anyway, to show you how it looks before it gets to this part. This is how it looks when it's all laid nice and flat. So I'm gonna just press my lining to one side, and I have the seam allowance aiming down so it's not any bulkier. If I had it facing up, that would be more bulky because this fabric is pretty thick compared to the lining. Okay, so now that that is pressed, I'm going to turn it around and put in the 2-inch bottom hem. And I turned it completely around so that I don't have to lean over and measure it up here. I'm just going to measure it right here at the end of the table. Anytime you can do any part of measuring or turning hems, if you can work right on the edge of the table rather than leaning over, you're going to save your back. So I'm checking the hem for a 2-inch, and then I'm also trying to line it up on this line right here just to keep the whole thing laying really squarely. It'll keep the whole valance hanging straight. Whenever I can line up a fabric on a line, I know that the whole project will hang better. Whether it's a valance or drapery or a pillow, bed skirt. Okay. After a while, it gets a little bit like you're just eyeballing it, and then you're just checking yourself to make sure you're accurate. Okay, so I have the whole thing pinned and checked for accuracy, and now I'm going to just press that bottom fold. And then before I pin it together, I'm gonna pin along the top raw edges. I'm gonna just steam the rest of the lining to make sure it has the same amount of shrinkage that happened down here with all the pressing and steaming. If I don't do this, there'll be a little bit extra lining, because by pressing it down here at the hem, it's shrinking a little bit. So I just want to make sure it's all equal everywhere. See how nice and flat that looks all through there? And then right here, you can see a little bit of movement. And now the whole thing looks nice and flat. And now I'll just pin across the top. I don't like to do the side hems until I have the face all pleated and measured and checked. So that'll be the last thing. And also I'm going to cut off a little bit of this lining. I have a little extra at the top. And then I'll turn it over. Okay, so now that I have the valance hemmed and pinned at the top, I'm ready to pleat the box pleats. So what I'm going to do is start kind of in the middle and find the middle of each of these two box pleats. So I'm just going to put a pin right in the middle of the top and the bottom. And that way I can bring this center part over to the middle. And I'm going to press that pleat down right on the crease. Try to get it to train right away. And I'm pressing the back of the pleat also. And then I can bring this one over and match it up. And then I'll press that one. And so basically that is the rest of the steps in just getting this box pleated. So I'll press that, and then I'll find the middle of this one, top and bottom, and then I can bring this one over this way and this one over this way. And press that, and then I'll find the middle of this one, match them up, and then this one, match them up, and then turn the side hems on the returns. And then I'll stitch those up by hand. Then we're ready for mounting. So I'll just speed this up so it's not boring and you can see how this comes together. Okay, so here we have our little cute box pleat valance almost finished. This is number 1 of 2. And here is the right return. I have it all laying really nice and neat. I'll open it up for you. I like to press the corners so that they will hang really nicely. So this is the right return. It's 3.5 inches. It's going to be mounted to a board that I will cover with lining. So 3.5 inch return with a side hem. And there's my 2 inch bottom hem. And I did put a weight in here. And then we have a corner pleat with the contrast fabric. And then here is the right panel that has a tree on it, and the left hand panel has a different tree. So the designer asked for the center panel to have these figures, the mom, the kids, and the dog. So we have the mom, the kids, and the dog, and they're really nicely balanced. So this middle panel measures 16 inches across, and that was the instruction on the work order. And then she wanted a tree and a tree, and she said, I know you will have to piece these panels together for the side panels with trees. They can be whatever trees work best. So that's what I did. I picked in the body of the fabric before I cut it, this tree is almost in this position, but a little bit not on the same plane. And this tree is almost exactly where it is. So it balances nicely having two different trees. It's more interesting than just doing the same tree on each section. And pretty much I had to make them different to get all the pieces I needed out of the fabric that was available to use. So this was the most important part. So we got that just how the designer is expecting it. And then the flow from this side to this side I think looks really nice. And then also the returns flow really nicely. So you can see that the same pattern is continuing from this panel to this panel. And I'm calling this a panel, that's just the return. It's a panel of fabric. And then look, I was so close on fabric that I had to use this piece that was missing a little section, but that'll be covered up at the board. And so you can see how the left return also flows nicely from this part to this part, where there's more palm tree action going on there. And this side is more about the oak trees. And so anyway, it just tells a nice story and it flows really nicely. And then this one is ready to mount. It'll get stapled on the board across the top, and then the extra will be cut off. And then there'll be a welt in the pleat fabric, this solid color, on the top. It's ready for the valance. And then once the valance is attached to the three sides, this will get wrapped around neatly, and then I'll cut off this extra and then fold that under and close it up. I'm going to start measuring the finish length to make sure we're even all the way across and on the returns also. And then I can start making adjustments before I do any stapling. So the corner is the trickiest part because of all these layers and the seams. I'm just making sure that the box pleat down here isn't too long so that it'll creep lower than the face. So this whole section right here now measures the right finish length at 14, and the corners match up. So now I'll move on to this middle section.